because that's how to effectively help an entrepreneur, right? And by that, I mean, entrepreneurship is so dang hard and so unique to each person's journey. Where you're coming from, the skills you have, the connections you have, the idea you're building, the industry you're building in, the emotional baggage you bring, that every entrepreneurial journey is completely unique.
Like-minded community. If you go back into a word cloud, we noticed this 50 applications into it 2 years ago, and it continues to this day. Like-minded community and people that you can connect with and learn from and teach has always been the thread that cuts across everything. And if you think about how communities are formed, right? It's for the longest time been with some sort of like fenced in, whether it's a sports team or a geography or a college you went to or a high school you went to. And the fact now that we have this globally distributed community where anybody who has an affinity towards building a certain thing in a certain space or helping a certain customer, and we're not putting in 9 layers of friction for you to get into it. This is what's amazing.
At day one, what I love and what I will continue to champion this publicly and privately is that there's a sense of potential in the air. You'll feel it even through Zoom and through, virtual stuff, that you feel like you're compelled to take action on your dreams. Even if it's a one step, even if it's not like a massive leap, but it's a one step. And that's sort of my favorite part. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Build in Public podcast. I am your host, KP, and today I am forced to do this interview. I'm just kidding. This is part of my contractual obligation. Just kidding. Of course, I'm joined by the incredible duo from day one. Welcome to the show, Andrew and Rahul.
Thanks for having us, KP.
Thanks for having us.
So Rahul put on a collared shirt and clearly has done some work on the lighting and everything, which, within day one, if anyone's watching, you guys know how serious this is now, right? So the stakes are high. I can't mess this up. But for folks who don't know this bit of information, I'm working at Day One, and I'm the program director at Day One for the build track. But I'm kind of double dipping and doing a lot of other things behind the scenes.
So much other
I'm
stuff.
really enjoying. Yeah. So folks, again, as maybe folks who may not know about you, I want to kind of give you a chance to introduce yourself. Give a 20, 30-second background of who you are, what brought you to starting Day One. And then I have my version of how I would describe you both, and I want to get to it.
Sometimes I'm always keen to hear how other people say it, because, the best advice is listen to your customers or your friends and your collaborators to see how they say what you do, and then just say that. So I'm trying to get out of the way, but what's up? I'm really pumped to be here. And so if you guys don't know me, I imagine a lot of you don't. I'm Andrew. Rahul and I started Day One in actually the summer of 2020, which was the sort of first peak of the pandemic. It really felt like we were a part of the group that was, it's time to build, right? And it was a time when I looked around at all the, everyone was tweeting about the amount of entrepreneurial energy that was happening. I was coming out of a venture studio. So that's my background. I broke into VC by joining a venture studio. I was on the team building the new ventures. And so that's my skill set, is guiding entrepreneurs through the messy early to middle stages of starting startups, which is pretty darn relevant. But, when 2020 rolled around, or at least as the pandemic was going, and, the impetus for leaving what was a great job at a venture studio to start something, go on this roller coaster, was to help more people, right? Democratize what happens inside of the venture world, inside of a venture studio, the tools, the community, the resources, the know-how, and 100x that, 1000x that, give it to everybody. So that's me. That's the why. What else do you want to know, where I grew up?
We'll save that to the director's edition, right? Special edition. But
cool.
No, that was actually a great sort of, the surface area you covered was awesome, because I wanted a little bit of your background, which you touched on, the venture studio, and then, of course, what got you into it? Why did you start Day One? What about you, Rahul?
Awesome. Hey, KP, thanks. I'm Rahul, the other co-founder at Day One. I've always kind of viewed my career as an adventure. It's kind of the next chapter doesn't have to always be connected to the chapter you just finished. So I started out as an oil and gas engineer, realized after 6 or 7 years, didn't like that, went back and got a sports management degree, wanted to work in that for about a year or two. And then I let life take me where it took me. And I ended up doing a 1-year service fellowship in rural India, building ultimate Frisbee leagues for village and slum communities and adolescent kids and youth. That then, surprisingly, I guess, led me to an almost 10-year nonprofit fundraising career where I was setting up international NGOs, U.S. fundraising offices. And so without any of the formal training or education or signals, I kind of became a social sector ED. And with a primary fundraising role, raised around $20 million in the process. And then, as I guess typically do every 5 or 6 years, I wanted to try something new. And then that's kind of what brought me to the world of innovation. And so I kind of did what I did the first time when I left engineering, and basically ended up crafting like an 18-month sabbatical where I never really knew what I was going to do more than 3 months down the road. I kept just getting into communities and volunteering and kind of offering my services, learning and being a sponge. It was in that time frame where I met Andrew. And it was in that time frame where I first got into Antler, a venture studio, which later on became one of our key investors. But my big learning and takeaway during that 18-month sabbatical is like I realized I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't know what to do next. And I started talking to other people in these communities and very quickly found out, like, holy moly, like there's a whole bunch of people like me who want to get into this. They don't know what to do because it's not as linear and kind of prescriptive as anything else we've ever learned. And I had just met Andrew in that period, and very serendipitously, I was kind of figuring out what to do next. And I saw him do a LinkedIn post about the application for the first ever Day One fellowship. And I think I was the 4th or 5th person to apply. I followed up with an email and a call, and kind of 2.5 years later, here we are.
Here we are. Wow. Wow. I did not know that you applied for Day One as a fellow, and then you had, that was a great entry point. So if anybody who's here in the audience or anyone who's watching this or is listening to this has ever applied to Day One, joinday1.com, you will have seen Rahul's face, because his face is plastered all over our website or email marketing at the bottom of, and he's one of the people that is always willing to go talk to customers, potential customers. And that's something I appreciated about Rahul, is that he's not afraid of sort of, rubber meeting the road moment where you really have to get into these awkward 15, 20-minute conversations with potential customers, which is part of our funnel anyway, right? Like the onboarding, or what do you call that? Like curation. Part of the curation is like understanding, who our customers are and getting them into our community. But I just really appreciated how much of do things don't scale that you've chosen to do, Rahul, over the years. And a couple of people that I talked to, including Candice and a couple of my friends, really enjoyed having those conversations with you. So speaks to your humility, speaks to your willingness to connect with people and more. But so bringing us back to the way I would describe both of you, because, as Flash News folks, I'm kind of new to Day One, right? But I came from, on deck, and I've had several friends and several stints in ed tech companies. And so I kind of know how the entrepreneurship companies have been. The two things that stuck out to me about both of you, and I'll share this publicly on air, is Andrew, you always impressed on me a leader who's got such high EQ. And I said this many times to you, and you think I'm gassing you up, but it's not. Because I'm saying this on air. I don't usually lie on air. Such high EQ and a willingness to listen, and something that I think is a great quality. Personally, I try to do the same, emulate the same, where I'm at least willing to listen. I will still push back and make my point if I have a strong opinion on a certain thing, but I'm not willing to not give you the respect of listening. And I think you're very much like that. I love that about you, because then it becomes a sparring thing, like to boxers or to people who are playing a sport, as opposed to being like an offensive, defensive thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Did you ever notice this about yourself? I
like that. I appreciate you. You've even said it a little differently than I've heard you say it in the past, and I think what you're getting at, the way I'll take it up a level, is that thing that I do. The reason why I do it is because that's how to effectively help an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right? And by that, I mean, entrepreneurship is so dang hard and so unique to each person's journey.
Yeah.
Where you're coming from, the skills you have, the connections you have, the idea you're building, the industry you're building in, the emotional baggage you bring, that every entrepreneurial journey is completely unique. And so to take, I'm one of the people like you, like the three of us on this call, but, of the people in the world, I'm at the top of people who've advised lots of entrepreneurs. I've seen a lot of different journeys, and I can tell you, and I've given a lot of advice, and believe me, it does get pretty common, right? There's a few things that a lot of entrepreneurs mess up or need support on, but I'll tell you, the receiver is unique. And that means that to deliver that message, for them to get the value, for them to make the move that you're going to know they need to make, I don't know if I'm conveying this well, I'm probably repeating myself. It's unique. It's its own thing. And so listening...
You have to meet them at where they are.
You have to meet them where they are, right? So you have to listen. You have to let them get it out there. In a lot of ways, this is like good education, right? You're not teaching. They're arriving at the conclusion.
Yes.
Right? And you're leading them to water and they're drinking. And so I find that like that's how I'll coach somebody, that's how I'll just meet somebody, and it's really the only thing that's effective, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll bring that all the way back to day one. Like our whole mission, I think a lot of less of about the mission, a lot of like how what we do is effective is to embody that and find ways to make that scale.
Yeah.
Right.
I will like toss one more point on this, and which is something that came up literally 2 hours ago in one of my conversations with one of our day one applicants, and which is a whole other tangent. Everybody, by the way, everybody at day one is doing customer discovery, which blows my mind. This is not normal. Not at most startups is usually the founder or they maybe one assigned person. Like Jake's doing it, our CMO. I'm doing it. Like, Rahul's always doing it. Andrew, you're up. It's wild how many people on the team, but Pam is doing it, Emily's doing it, I'm going through the roster. And we're all sort of soaking up and being a sponge to what people are thinking about, what people are saying about the need, what's missing, et cetera. And then bringing it to like our Slack or all hands and stuff like that. And so the best way to build a 0 to 1 company is to talk to more customers, right? Paul Graham somewhere is like laughing, smiling, and being proud of us. And so that's another tangent we'll get to. But Rahul, so back to you. What I loved about getting to knowing you more and like getting to spend more time with you is, you have sort of this diverse backgrounds and experiences, almost like you've lived 4 or 5 lifetimes in one lifetime. And so it's awesome that we sort of subconsciously chose you to be in these customer facing onboarding conversations, because you could talk to practically anybody and make them feel home. There's a sense of belonging that you offer. What I felt when I had my first call with you, Rahul, and this is like when we were just feeling, like the opportunity here. And I felt this guy gets me. And you spoke to me like 7 minutes. And I'm like, that's wild. And you come from oil and gas, not my world. You come from like Texas, LSU, like, what are you talking about, right? Like something really crazy. But you somehow find a way to weave the threads and say, here's how we both are similar, KP.
Yeah.
And I know our fellows feel this when they talk to you, because
when my wife and I started dating, you start asking these questions, what do you want to be remembered for? And for me, it's like, I've always wanted to be able to understand somebody's journey and be able to share mine. Like that's always been a goal of mine. I do want to say something about Andrew just before I think the thing about Andrew that makes him really unique is that he's very smart, yet kind.
Yeah.
And I very intentionally use the word yet, because any of us that have been around very, very smart people, it's kind of a crapshoot whether they're nice people or not. And I think the fact that Andrew's smart, but also empathetic and kind is, I think, what allows him to kind of be who he is, not just internally on the team, but with other fellows and stuff.
That's lovely and so on point. And we're gassing you up, Andrew. You're spending us some mental money, right? We're all expecting campaigns tonight.
Rahul knows that the only reason I can show up like that all the time is because he's my sounding board for when I'm venting and mean. And
So to KP, like there's an anecdote I want to share. So I did the oil and gas stuff for a while. I worked at a very large Fortune 100 company that is an enemy in a lot of people's eyes. And then I did nonprofit work, right?
Yeah, the opposite.
And like the narrative that people, when they would meet me and talk to me and ask about my career, like it was just like almost flippantly, they'd be like, oh my God, you went from the evil empire to doing God's work. And I thought about that. And it's Andrew, everybody on this team knows that what really upsets me is when people kind of take the lazy way out of just kind of putting labels on things. And I thought to myself, I was like, you know what, when I worked at those oil and gas companies, there were just some really nice people, like really regular, down to earth, nice people who happened to work there, who did accounting or whatever. Like they weren't about world domination.
Right.
And then in the social sector, everybody would be shocked at the size of some of the egos in that one, right? And the fact that people would just immediately say you went from evil empire to God's work, and it was like, that's not what it is. And so that's a macro kind of statement of like all the stuff I've experienced. And I think the one big takeaway that I've had, not just with me, but with people I've talked to, is like life is really just this journey of self-actualization. And allowing people to articulate that, share that, and ultimately, I don't want to say achieve it because that's a tall task, but at least take a step in that direction. And I think what feels really cool about entrepreneurship, not just to us and our fellows, but the people that we all talk to, is for the longest time, your livelihood was never going to be self-actualized. It was going to be through the lens of a company that gave you a paycheck.
Right.
So your identity was always going to be tied up into who you worked for and what they did.
Right.
And I think the beautiful thing about entrepreneurship, and I think what allows me to really enjoy these discovery calls is when you get down to the crux of like why somebody wants to be an entrepreneur and what it means to them and how that fits into the puzzle of kind of their life, I think you're able to really unlock some meaningful conversations. And I think the fact that for the longest time and going forward, that's been a relatively important filter of the folks that come into the day one community. I think that's what's allowed our community to feel so tight knit and
right. The focus on being tight knit, being human, being authentic, I think shines through our, essence, in my view, both on social, on the website, through our public events, free events, and of course, internally too, through our education tracks and everything. I want to bring us back to that comment that one of our fellows made this morning. I thought it was interesting. And she said, what I loved about day one was connection. I thought that was interesting because, you hear about content. So I think about things like, there's content, top of the funnel, either it's tweets, social media, like TikTok videos, whatever. But content almost is a commodity, right? On the internet, everybody's creating content. Like millions of people woke up today and created content on the internet. And so then you think about, okay, what else can you differentiate yourselves in? And then you think community. We're a strong community. We're the kind of place that you want to come to if you want to feel belonged. If you feel like making some mistakes in your entrepreneurship path, talk to some of us here who've been in these shoes. So there's a big part of that. But even within community, there's like 7 communities a day that are popping up. And they all kind of, at least on the landing page, claim the same thing, right? But what I thought was surprising to me when I heard her say that was connection. And I thought, damn, that is not scalable. And the internet can't help you with that. No amount of Google searches can make you feel connected, feel part of your journey the way you feel assured and reassured. And I thought that was so cool that she mentioned it. And I want to kind of bring it back to you guys because the obvious takeaway for me in the first week of being at day one was how small and tight-knit it felt. And there was a sense of connection, on the team, of course, but also with the fellows. Is this something that you give a lot of thought about?
Yeah.
You fuse this into what day one is as a business?
Well, I'll just build on what I was saying before, right? Which is, I think it's the thing that's most effective is, well, the thing that I've personally found to be effective to help an entrepreneur. How might we productize that? How might we build a scalable way to deliver that? Well, you allow people to connect with each other, right? And you create the space and you create it's a little bit about like-minded people connecting, but we all know that that's really not just it, right? That's like a nice to have. That's that's like a surface layer,
right?
Where people see I'm similar. But it's more about really, the best communities. I mean, the ones I remember the most were the sports teams I was on, right? That was my journey growing up. And it's when you're in the battle together, right? And when you go on and you do hard things together and then have fun together and then have an achievement together and have a loss together. And so that is how we've built community, where the community is not just throwing people into Slack or Discord, right? Community is 1, the sum of the relationships made. 2, what kind of spaces allow those relationships? It's when people go to battle together. It's when they go to learn together, right? It's when they go to build tough things and share their things together. And so, a lot of that is the connections is what you feel. That's the way to describe it, right? But it's definitely the product design, the community design, all the way down that enables that. So absolutely, that's definitely a testament to the thing we do working, these atomic units of community happening and it being effective for an entrepreneur, so that, keep going on that. That's our core thesis for how we do what we do.
Right. Rahul, what's your take on it?
Just extending that, I think the atomic unit piece is big. So much in the startup world, whether you know it or you don't know it, appears to be binary.
Yeah.
Either you get the investment or you don't, or either you this or you that. And it's so result focused, not to get too much into Nick Saban's philosophy, but it's not about the scoreboard. It's not about the result. Actually, the atomic unit is every snap, every play. And so there are so many wins that aren't celebrated in so many communities because they're not the result.
Yes.
And on this result-focused society that we have, especially in entrepreneurship and early stage innovation, it's binary and it's not 50-50. It's 5-95. And so 95% of people just feel like failures. And so we don't use that word. We don't use success, failure. We don't even give people a sense of what that is,
right?
Because it's going to be different for everybody. So we celebrate shipping something. We celebrate putting your first user persona together, stuff that, might not ever hit the top stage with the top lights, but within a community, within a core group of people, these are all wins that everybody celebrates. And so I think it's that level of transparency and kind of double clicking in on what everybody is doing on a step-by-step basis that starts building some of these bonds, right?
Yeah. I want to comment on one thing. I've noticed everybody wants fast results, right? So they join these communities, almost they're window shopping, and they're going in, they're checking out the Slack, checking out the Vibe, and then they're I'm not getting the result that I want. They leave. But people forget your results are like lagging indicators of your personal transformation, right? To your point earlier, Rahul, like it's all about self-actualization. So if you're not making steady progress as an entrepreneur, now who's suddenly more courageous and more brave to do a showcase, now suddenly who's more vulnerable to do a build in public, on Twitter or socials. Unless you make those micro changes and achieve those atomic units of growth, you're never going to see this binary results that you're seeking. So no checking into Heartbeat or Slack or Discord can solve that, right? So I think one of the things that I love being part of our community and just like everybody around here is we tell the truth. We will say this on a customer discovery call or on a sales pitch. Yeah. And I'm not afraid to take a no, and you're this way too, and say this is maybe not the right place for you. If you're looking for a quick fundraising path, like if you just want the 4 intros to 8 VCs and just boom, like finish the round, this is not the place. This is about 1%, small wins, atomic units of growth. And then we hope that you transform in a certain amount of time, but we just don't, nobody can tell you when,
I say this all the time, that anybody who comes in with a primary focus on the outcome that they want for their company, statistically speaking, that company may or may not be around in 2 years, but you as an entrepreneur will be. And so I want to invest in the sustainable piece of this story, which is you, the entrepreneur, And so the entrepreneur just waking up tomorrow more confident, better network with better skills, healthy behaviors, like support systems. It doesn't matter whether it's the company they bring or the idea they bring or something 5 or 6 or 10 years down the road. That's the investment in yourself that you're making when you come to a day one.
Yeah, love it. So I'm going to bring us to an interesting sort of prompt that I've had. I saw this on Twitter the other day, and I thought this was really interesting. So this is the sort of, I'm leading up to this big announcement we're going to talk about in a second. So stay tuned. But the premise is, this came from YC, Paul Graham's tweet, and he described sort of the core essence of what significant growth looks like is actually the answer to this simple question as an entrepreneur, which is what have you learned from customers, talking to customers in the last year, right? And I want to ask this as sort of the preamble to what we're going to talk about the next, 15, 20 minutes. So Rahul and Andrew, what have you guys learned about day one's customer, that is true now that was new to you compared to a year ago?
You want to go first? Or you want me to jump in?
I'll go first with the macro. The macro, and I think Andrew tells the story really well. 2 years ago, both coming from the venture world, especially Andrew coming from the studio world, we were saying no to 990 people out of 1,000. And so we initially built day one for the people on the doorstep of venture, the people who kind of may or may not have been in that tech bubble, let's call it.
Right.
Primarily New York City based, kind of what we learned though in that first year is that people then were referring their friends, their family, people from places outside of quote unquote tech hubs, people that didn't have the signal or the pedigree that would have even had them know what a venture studio was.
Right.
And I think that was our first big insight, our first massive insight, which is what led to our kind of successful pre-seed, was this idea that there's a hunger out there for people wanting to learn the basics of entrepreneurship and wanting to rub elbows and work alongside and with more experienced founders or whatever. So I think that widening of that aperture of who really we're speaking to and who that message is resonating with was really, I think, what set everything else in motion going forward.
Gotcha.
Andrew, you can take it.
Yeah.
No, that's huge. I mean, like you said, that was sort of that was the transition, the jump from kind of the first version, the first hypothesis of day one to what we've become now, which is the school for entrepreneurs that doesn't pretend or speak solely to, that bubble, We are building a brand that speaks to the watchers of Shark Tank,
Yeah.
Like all these different ways. And so
more mainstream.
More mainstream, right?
Just the tech Twitter audience, right? Yeah, we joke about that all the time.
I mean, we're probably speaking to you. It's funny, right? Like it's hard to reach that person. The way it has always happened was just word of mouth, right?
Yeah.
Where everyone knows somebody who's struggling with these things.
Yeah.
So I'd say underneath all that is kind of just a deeper empathy for kind of the core, we call it the job to be done, right? Yeah. It's not just the problem. It's not just the challenge that someone's facing, but the core desire that everybody has. And it's not just belonging, right? Belonging somewhere in the mix, right? That's superhuman, super deeply human based, right? Belonging. So community businesses always work well in that regard, right?
Right.
It really is actualization and success. Yep. And the way that happens for like humans isn't just these like outward facing badges and stars that like we get really used to going up the ladder in our corporate jobs. Like the corporate world is so structured,
right?
But the entrepreneurial world is so unstructured that
wilderness, right?
That for you to feel actualized is to just like, I mean, I'm kind of repeating what Rahul said, see yourself make progress, right? Mm-hmm. And so we've started to build all those pieces. Seeing yourself make progress can look like having an answer to someone else's question and being like, oh, I'm not just the asker of all these questions. I know that, right? To turn someone from somebody who thinks they're an asker to an answerer, which I kind of know is true at all times, right? Every single person coming into day one has the answer to someone else's question.
Yeah.
Right? That's the way the world works. You have latent insights and knowledge that someone else needs.
Right.
To bring those out, to bring those connections together, just shows people like, oh, I like belong here. Yes. Right. But I can do this. I know these things. Now I feel confident to go ask those questions. So it's just like this deep understanding and empathy for this entrepreneurial journey. Another reason I know that is because like I have it myself, you know, like 2 years into this, like 6 months into day one, I was like, I am right with you. To all of the fellows. I was like, we're not any further than you. Right. We haven't raised around yet. Right. We are bootstrapping ourselves. Like, I don't know why you trust me. I mean, I did some other stuff. Rahul did some other stuff. We had a lot of mentors who were really good and smart. But now 2 years in, I'm like in the messy middle with a lot of our fellows, but I can speak to some of the journey and just like empathize with, man, it's just like feeling confidence in that next step that you have to make and being able to put one foot forward. And so a long way to say it's like not oddly, I think we all get it, right? It's just really personal, really, you know, about that actualization. And so, yeah.
So in terms of like the latest insights that you may have been analyzing, both of you, right? Which I'm asking like sort of as an audience, a member in the community, like what has been some new stuff that you've discovered?
Maybe I spent too much time talking about... How has it
parlayed into some kind of a change in the company?
Yeah. Thanks for taking us up there. I probably spent too much time talking big picture, even on top of Rahul's like the big insight. The core, the micro of it that we've been really learning in the last 6 months as 2022 has unfolded, inflation and markets and, you know, things are not necessarily as optimistic as they were in 2021. We've realized that, you know, we've always known that to like jump over the ledge and be an entrepreneur puts you in this like really scary, fragile state. Right? You know, you're at the beginning of a long journey. You know, it's going to suck or at least have the ups and the downs. You're probably feeling much more cost sensitive than you were when you had a paycheck, almost certainly, right? And you don't know if in 3 months you're going to be on a tear and too busy to take anybody's calls or searching for a co-founder because you feel you can't do it. Like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months into the future, you don't know what the world looks like for yourself. Right. So we've kind of sat with those. I would, you know, if you asked me a year ago, I would have said those are true statements. I think we feel them now. And to that point, we've been talking to users. We've heard them say, you know, they're on the doorstep to joining day one and it's too expensive, right? They're on the doorstep to joining day one and it's not flexible enough, right? And so we basically, you teed us up for this, right? We've made a huge shift in how we've structured not the core community and not the core experience, but the packaging of how day one is, how we go to market and how you buy and consume and join day one is now different. And we've added monthly memberships into the mix, which sounds very simple.
It makes it affordable now, right? Because it's now $149 for education.
No long-term commitment, right? So that's the other side. So it's monthly memberships, which are no long-term commitment, and the cost goes from a yearly cost to a monthly cost, right? So it's 10x it's 1/10 the cost. If you stay for a whole year, it adds up, of course, but that means you've gotten value and we've delivered value, and it's been an amazing relationship, and that's what we want, right? So we want to align ourselves with our fellows in a much more like obvious way. And so we're lowering the cost through these monthly memberships. We're also offering us another tier. We've always offered day one as this whole package. Right? And what we're doing for the first time is we're separating out the kind of the flagship programming that we've been running for 2 years, which has the live cohort-based courses. It has your build track. It has all the tracks that we've been running, and creating a separate tier for that we're calling the community membership. right? And this has access to the whole community. So everyone's in the community. It has access to, a series of live events that are specific for the community membership. It has access to all the resources, all the perks that we have curated. And that's a lower price point. And that's a really good fit for somebody who's just like kicking the tires, right? Just kind of getting their toes wet, maybe into entrepreneurship as a whole, and you just want to see what it's like and see what other people are doing. Maybe that's a perfect fit also for somebody has more of an entrepreneurship job, right? And they're just looking to soak in what happens in the startup world, even though you're just building what you're building, right? Or just doing what you're doing. And so that tier is now a whole nother level, more affordable, still monthly memberships, equally flexible. And so it feels like one small step for us, but like a big deal ultimately for how you consume these communities, right? And
so that specific tier actually gets me excited. But I know there's another person on this podcast who's just as excited. It's Rahul. Loves that I know he's been the champion for making sure everybody who ever applies or ever lands on the website gets a taste of our community. Those words have been uttered by him like 1,700 times by now. And so Rahul, I know this is like your question. How pumped are you about the community tier? Right? And why do you think it's such a great addition to what we already have?
First of all, it's $49 a month with no long-term commitment. So that's $2 a day, right? And we know that even in the toughest of times, people invest in education. People, anytime there's a learning opportunity, people will invest in themselves, which is amazing, right? For $2 a day, it allows people to, there's so many use cases, right? People who are just kicking the tires, who want to get their feet wet, people who can't really visualize what the next 2 or 3 months will look like, and they can slowly kind of, upgrade or whatever 1 or 2 months into it. People who have had life events happen where they can't feel like they can commit to 3 hours a week at a certain time. Right. Now we've given them an option to not just like put a hold on starting the journey. They can at least jump in, go to the website, click a button, be in by the evening, and at least start hearing other discussions and seeing what people are doing and building. And I think for somebody like my use case, and even KP, somebody like you 2 or 3 years ago, is like, I think the huge opportunity here is like, because what we're selling is connection and people and like creative thoughts and ideas and kind of people's different takes on what the future can and should look like.
Right.
There's a world where like people even years before wanting to even get into their entrepreneurial journey, find that as a very palatable price point and community to be in.
Right.
Like, I think the aperture is quite wide now for people in my life, right? Those of us who have friends that after college went into the private sector, played that game very, very well in the corporate world. They're up in the C-suite at these amazing companies. Anytime we get together and have a drink or something, they're always talking about all the ideas that they have. There's a huge opportunity for folks like that to be in this tier and not feel like they're signing up to learn or do any of that deeper stuff in our middle tier, but just kind of be part of a really cool community where they see how many other people are thinking about who's craving popcorn at 4 a.m. and how do we get it there as fast as possible. Like this could be a cool place to see, is anyone working on that? And if the answer is no, maybe that's not a very important thing for people anymore.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think for a long while, as I talked to Emily and I talked to some of our other team members too, I felt like there was a unspoken desire from our community to have this tier of like being the first step into day one, right? Because, it's low stakes. Not just from a price perspective, even from a time commitment to what you just said. And you get the sample taste of like a lot of the stuff that we do anyway, right? And you still like understand the vibe, you understand like build connections. You can still do the intros.ai, the connection stuff, which we do. And so I think it's, to me, what it is like the other day somebody was asking, how would I describe our Slack as we were making the transition? It's part of our customer discovery conversations. And I said, the way I would describe it, it's not fully there yet. The way I would describe it is it has the signs of being a private Quora, right? Where you ask a question, within 2 minutes, someone's going to answer you or at least point you to the right direction, right? If someone's like asking a question about no code, low code, I'm going to say something about it. And like, so I think that level of curated, answering and like guidance doesn't exist on the internet, which is a free for all, like, anybody can say anything and like sell you on stuff and that kind of thing.
And not
just the Slacks, by the way, but there's other parts too.
Not to just go back to the community piece, but it's so important. I think it's worth sharing that even back in that summer of 2020, when Andrew put that website up and we got 200 inbound, from that day until now, what is it, Andrew? More than 1,000 applicants, right? Maybe 1,500, something like that. maybe even more. Like-minded community. If you go back into a word cloud, we noticed this 50 applications into it 2 years ago, and it continues to this day. Like-minded community and people that you can connect with and learn from and teach has always been the thread that cuts across everything. And if you think about how communities are formed, right? It's for the longest time been with some sort of like fenced in, whether it's a sports team or a geography or a college you went to or a high school you went to. And the fact now that we have this globally distributed community where anybody who has an affinity towards building a certain thing in a certain space or helping a certain customer, and we're not putting in 9 layers of friction for you to get into it.
Yeah.
This is what's amazing. I mean, KP, you see it. We have on Luma, we have, 15, 20 countries represented. We have people from all over the place. I think that's the really, really amazing thing that this kind of lower price point tier is going to unlock for us.
Yeah, I love that. Segueing into another sort of fun prompt that I have, and this may, if it takes a minute or two, it's fine, I'll come back to it. The question is, what's something an existing day one customer or a fellow taught you recently? Something that could be maybe as simple as making an intro for something.
Right.
Or I'm trying to put you in the.
Am I going to go over to Slack and look?
Yeah. Because you guys are also fellows, quote unquote, right? You're honorary fellows of day one. How have you found value at day one?
Oh.
You didn't come prepared for this one, Rahul, right?
No, the problem is I have too many to pick from. So I'm actually trying to figure out how do I not take up the final 15 minutes. So, I mean, look, what I learned from them is just inspiration. I think the patience, I think one of the things the venture has done, for better or worse, is like that flavor of entrepreneurship has almost like eaten up entrepreneurship. And so all the things that we're taught as kids around patience and things taking time and putting in the work and the reps, like that's almost been all erased from the lexicon because of just the emphasis on speed in the venture world.
Scale.
And so speed and scale, and if it doesn't happen fast enough, then it's like it never happened,
Right.
And so I draw a ton of inspiration from our first 2 or 3 cohorts of fellows, and the fact that they have now pivoted multiple times, they're still trucking through. I don't want to get into naming names because there's just so many. I don't want anyone to feel left out, but there's been folks, there's one person in cohort 1. I spoke to her maybe a month or 2 ago. Her day job has gone better than she thought. She's gotten a promotion or 2. She is still doing customer discovery.
Wow.
Think of the dedication that takes to 2.5 years into it. And it's not like our call was like, I'm still doing customer discovery.
Right.
This sucks. She was energized by every 50 calls she had, she learned something and then pivoted that next set of 20 conversations. And to find somebody who was unbelievably energized, not just about their day job and all their promotions, but to be I have unlocked this joy in customer discovery that I didn't even know was possible. There's another cohort 1 fellow that over time, I think she came to us with a startup and now she's basically an operator at a fund herself. And a lot of those insights and what made her, she's actually told us the reason that part of why she got this job is because she was able to share with them what the trials and tribulations of a founder go through. And so that ability to have that vision. So this is just one example. I don't want to discount anyone who's been kind of here for the last couple of cohorts, but all of that to tie into a bow is just the determination and the stick-to-itiveness
grit
and the commitment to the problem and the grit that so many of these people have shown, where they haven't kind of hit those binary rock star things that we all celebrate.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But they've actually found joy in the journey, and they, to a person, there's half a dozen to a dozen of these in my head right now. They are stronger, more confident founders that are assets to the people that they're around. And that's what makes me feel really awesome about kind of what we built.
Well, what an answer. Andrew, can you top that one? Can you match that one?
I can match it. Which is...
Take a different direction.
No, it's definitely a different direction. So I'm thinking about, we just did the showcase for this most recent cohort, right?
Correct.
And, a dozen or so of the fellows who were at that stage where they were, they're not, some of them are definitely investable, frankly, right? But a lot of them are just in that messy middle. But this was one of the first cohorts where the cohort was both too big and, day one has grown, where I wasn't in the weeds with frankly, all of them, right? Almost every other cohort, this was the beginning of me kind of stepping out. And so I got to hear some of these folks pitch their ideas for the first time. And I was like, that's going to work. That is a great idea. And I'm like, if you don't do it, someone's going to do it. That's going to happen, right? And so I just feel inspired by just like the cool ideas. And I'm like, man, I wish I could like multiply myself and co-found with like half a dozen of these people. Cause like they're going to make it. I'll go be their number two. Like
I felt the same way, just to attest to what you're saying. I was in the audience and Rahul was there too. And like, I was hyped up. Like, my wife says that I'm already very hype. And this is like, this is another reason. Cause Pam, I was joking with Pam that like, Pam, like just, you didn't prepare me for this shit. Cause this is like, they were dropping bombs. They were like, they had like 3-part act prepared, and God, it was so fun. And I remember feeling like, I don't know, 10 years ago when I went to Vanderbilt, I was in like hackathons and shit. And the end of the hackathon, it was like 45 minutes when everybody were getting on the stage and pitching was the most fun part, right? Because you were like seeing all the hard work come to life and like on the stage.
And there's something really about, honestly, I think it's better than a demo day because I've been to demo days too. And I'm like, they don't get me going because it's a little bit of like, it's too closed. It's too put together.
I feel like demo days have a little bit of an exclusive vibe to them. And also it's like very well too much packaged. Right.
And
you know the right thing to say to get the investors.
There's no more service area to like think there's like work. I don't know. Then that's the point. We're a fully finished product. So these pitches, these ideas just felt so much more like, again, it just like got me salivating to like bite into them. Cause
so what I did after, so I don't know if this is maybe like the day after or like 2 days after, I went back and like I had, I have like, I don't know, a Notion doc with like 80 ideas always floating around. Every time I get an idea, I just document it because I want to get it out of my head. And I shipped a new side project called podcastprompts.com because I was feeling guilty that I'm in company of these doers and people who have crazy ass jobs, 9 to 5, like really struggling situations and still finding a way to like produce stuff and ship stuff. And I'm here living, like working at day one where like literally everything I do is a job, like part of our thing. I'm like, I can't get an excuse for this. I gotta ship something. So I just got to sort of color on that, which is at day one, what I love and what I will continue to champion this publicly and privately is that there's a sense of potential in the air. You will feel it even through Zoom and through, virtual stuff that you feel like you're compelled to take action on your dreams, even if it's a one step, even if it's not like a massive leap, but it's a one step. And that's sort of my favorite part. Rahul, to you.
Yeah, no. And to follow what Andrew said. And so I shared with my thing the 2.5 year story arc, but I also want to share what Andrew said, like, because I spoke to so many of those fellows during the interviews 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
On a 30 minute call, it took them 10 to 15 minutes sometimes to like kind of articulate their thing.
Right.
So for me, it's amazing to see that in literally 6 weeks, they go from taking 10 minutes to kind of explain what they're doing to have a 3-minute tight, like a piece of content that they could go out and send out to investors, friends, family, whatever. So to see that amazing turnaround and tightening of what they're doing with laser focus and a 4 to 6 to 8 week period, it's amazing.
Yeah. Love it. Awesome. For my last question for you both, actually, I'm going to cheat. I have 2 questions. One is co-founder question. I got to ask you this. A lot of folks that listen to my stuff are either solo founders or they're probably just like dating a co-founder. What is your advice to them? What are some things to look out for? What are some good traits to identify? And how should they go about the process of discovering the co-founder?
I have 2 thoughts.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of data points we can mine. One for me was you have to decide if you want one or not, right? It's 90%, it's at least 50% a very personal decision to even like make the effort to go find and go get a co-founder. Because it's like every relationship, it's not going to be like, there's no 100% like no work fit, right? At some point, you're going to have to compromise a little, do something, right? So you really just need to know if you want it. And therefore, it's probably best if both of you know that you want it. So I knew I had that. I had done the soul searching to be like, I don't care if I'm giving up equity. I don't care if we're going to like have fights down the road. Like I want to have a co-founder. That's the experience I want. And I just knew it. And then I think that helped a ton, right?
Awareness around what,
So figure out if you want it or not. If you're only halfway there, you're probably going to self-sabotage your whole
pursuit,
right?
Yeah.
Pursuit, right? Actually, I was so strongly opinionated about that one. I'll say that was my one thought. So
that was a good one. That was a good one.
I'll pass it over to Rahul.
That is your piece. Rahul, what do you think?
It's a marriage. So don't rush into it. One of the coolest things I got from Antler when I did it the first time was this founder spreadsheet. Andrew and I it talks about future scenarios. It's got 50, 60 questions in it. Would love to. I've shared it with some Day One fellows before. We can do it.
I'd love to include that in the show notes. If you
yeah. And it was, it takes 3-4 hours for each of us to fill it out. And then you talk about it. And I think it's fantastic because it, one, gives you scenarios in the future that you probably wouldn't think about. And two, it forces you to talk about them. How would you deal with them? Well, what are your hopes and dreams? And so I think tactically that's a really important thing to do. But I think at the end of the day, you have to respect one another and you have to understand what the other brings to the table that you wouldn't be able to bring on your own. And I think if that piece isn't there, if it's almost too much of an overlap, there's, inevitably going to be a power struggle. I think Andrew and I, in whatever way, whether it was known or unknown, I think complement one another so that there's not too many things. In fact, I can't really think of any things where like one of us has kind of raised our hand to do it and the other wishes they were doing it. I think we just both kind of have the same mindset. But I think with our backgrounds and where we come from and what we say we bring to the table, there isn't much area to fight over. I think that's very, very important because if it's too much overlap, that's where conflict can arise going forward.
Right. I love that. Awesome. So the last question is on the future of education. I have to ask you this because you guys are in the ed tech world. I mean, so am I, but much more so because you're pitching day one and talking about day one to a lot of investors and some of the non-fellows. What are some observations that you've had in the last maybe 3 months to 6 months period where you think education as a trend is evolving, like online education, the future of education?
Well, I don't know.
And you're not allowed to say day one. You're not allowed to say that the future is day one.
So I've been talking to a lot of folks who are actually in the ed tech world. I have realized I'm now in the ed tech world and I'm learning what I don't know about that whole ecosystem and like all these really smart people who understand like pedagogy behind all these different learning platforms. And so I've been going up this awesome learning curve. And one of the things that the smart people will talk a lot about is that like good learning, whether it's like for kids or adults or anything in between, is far less about the stuff, the what's and the knowledge, and far more about two things. One is making it fun and playful so that people want it. And two, making it, actionable, making it so that the real learning is on the other side of doing something, right?
In terms of like action, making it applicable.
Applicable, yeah. And really giving space for people to put things to work into action, right? Because it's only when you try things out and learn how it really works for you or what it's like to do the thing, do you actually have learnings. So there's way more articulate ways to say that. But I think there's a lot of platforms popping up, a lot of them for kids in grade school, basically you could apply it to any subject at any age level. And I think there's a better way to teach than like the current system. And so we're picking ours. We are talking about entrepreneurship and we're talking about, right now it's adults, but I would love to do this for high schoolers or for college kids. And we're going to make it playful and we're going to make it actionable, right? And so I think
it'll be fun. Just
the whole world will get there.
I love it. And I have to toss this out there as a thought that just propped up. What would be fun is maybe next summer for us to explore day one boot camp or day one summer camp for high school kids. Because, they are a lot of them who want to be entrepreneurs. They're watching Gary Vee's content. They're watching, Mark Cuban on Shark Tank, and they want to get their hands dirty, but they can't get into YC. Maybe they can get into some of these other more prestigious and a little bit like stiff institutions. I think that could be a fun experiment for us to learn from.
We might have to have them run the boot camp because I'm pretty sure they're going to teach me a lot more than probably I'll be able to teach them.
But I think that would be fun actually, because it'll keep us honest about our pedagogy and like sort of our delivery of lectures or workshops because, their attention span is so little. So we will learn a lot. Anyway, Rahul, back to you. What is the future of education in your words?
Just quickly, because we're almost at time. Lifelong learning, not time boxed, because it'll be interwoven at whatever stage or phase of life that you're in. And then ultimately, if you look at automation and robots and all of that, it's going to be more around EQ, problem solving skills, design thinking, crisis management. It's going to involve all the stuff that we're teaching at day one, again, not intended to be a PSA, but like critical thinking, collaboration, teamwork, to kind of understand a problem and then figure out a way to solve it, which is ultimately the job of every entrepreneur. So that's what I think it's going to be. That's what I kind of think it is already today.
Right. Yeah, I think so too. I think it's already here. Anyway, thank you so much for your time here. It was a fun conversation. It was a blast chatting with you outside of the work setup. This could have been a Zoom call, but it's not. It's the podcast. I can't tell the difference though. Anyway,
thanks for having us. So appreciate it.
Looking forward to keeping in touch. All right.
Absolutely.
All right. See you in Slack.
See you in an hour.
All right. See you. Have a good one.
Thanks a lot, KP. This was awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.